Madam Speaker, it is indeed an honour to speak on inquiry number 13, launched by Senator Marty Klyne, calling the attention to the Senate to the ongoing business and economic contributions made by Indigenous businesses in Canada's economy. I have chosen to speak about the Aboriginal People's Television Network as it heads into its 25th year. APTN is part of a new and growing national Indigenous infrastructure, national organizations that advance the status of Indigenous people, and I will just mention three others. The National Indigenous Economic Development Board, headed by Don Madabi-Leach, is a national non-political organization working to promote the growth of Aboriginal business in Canada. The First Nations Financial Authority, whose mission is to help First Nation communities build their own futures on their own terms at the best rates. It is headed by Ernie Daniels, who was recently appointed to the Board of Governors of the Bank of Canada. And third, the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada, headed by Keith Henry, which focuses on the growth of Indigenous tourism in Canada. Now on APTN, I've had a privileged front row seat to watch the development of this innovative and essential service, which is APTN. As a commissioner of the CRTC, I have the great honour to be closely involved in its licensing in 1998 to 1999. So, why was APTN necessary? Well, Aboriginal peoples were rarely seen in television and film, just as they were rarely seen in Canadian history and American history. And to the extent that they were seen, their portrayal was generally negative and stereotypical. Let me give you one memorable intervention from the hearing back in 1998. Award-winning actor Adam Beach testified at the hearing, and he'd been developing a strong career in Canada and the U.S., but relayed an interesting example to us. He was part of a film, and in the development of that, the director instructed him to run along this wall and jump like an Indian. Now, that was a relatively positive stereotype from what we saw. Well, colleagues, here we are in their 25th year, and I'm delighted to share an overview of their development. When APTN launched on September 1, 1999, it was the first national Indigenous broadcaster in the world. Today, the network has become a global leader in programming that celebrates the full diversity of Indigenous peoples, first within Canada, but also internationally. And they now share their stories with nearly 10 million households in Canada and beyond. Interestingly, its ratings are on the upswing, even while the overall TV viewing across the broadcasting world is on the decline. There is much that can be said about their stellar record. The network has won numerous awards, consistently offering cutting-edge digital programming and interactive content. It has launched 2 radio stations as well as non-demand streaming service, APTN Lumi. Let me give you a few details. Since launching, APTN has consistently offered programming that aims to connect Indigenous and non-Indigenous audiences across Turtle Island. I found their slogan particularly pointed when they launched in 1999. It went like this: by Aboriginal people, about Aboriginal peoples, for all Canadians. So what will you see on APTN? The programming ranges from news and current affairs to entertainment to live broadcasts and special events to award-winning original programs by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis creators. Given the diversity of Indigenous peoples in Canada, APTN has to work hard to provide something for everyone, and it accomplishes this pretty well. Through the network, you will find programming in English, French, Cree, including the first ever broadcast of an NHL game in Plains Cree, Inuktitut, and a wide range of other Indigenous languages. Since 1999, APTN has broadcast programming in 54 different Indigenous languages and now provides regular programming in 15 Indigenous languages annually. Increasingly, Indigenous peoples are identifying that knowing their ancestral language is important to recognizing and consolidating one's sense of culture and identity. And it is in this vein that APTN encourages Indigenous creators to speak their language with pride and tell their stories in their voices. Currently, over 80% of their scheduling consists of Canadian content with programming in English, French, and more than 15 Indigenous languages. And colleagues, let me just point to that. 80% content is considerably higher than the industry average, which is generally around 50%. On average, APTN commissions over 500 hours of original programming each year. 46% of this programming is in English, 44% is in Indigenous languages, and 10% in French. A few words about Indigenous content on demand. The new kid on the block, 20 years ago, 20 years after it began, APTN launched their Indigenous-focused streaming service that's beside the broadcast services called APTN Lumi. The current catalog includes some 700 hours of Indigenous language programming as well as English and French offerings. APTN Lumi is also available via Chromecast and Apple TV channels, extending the reach and connecting new audiences and Indigenous stories. So now these last few sentences is really CRTC broadcasting programming gobbledygook. Let me just translate and say they do a big load of proudly Indigenous programming. I want to highlight that as an award-winning network, APTN has won many awards over the years, including the Canadian Screen Awards, Audience Choice Award, the prestigious President's Award from RTNDA Canada, Press Freedom Award, and the Michener Award. To top it off, APTN CEO Monica Illy, a member of the Abenaki First Nation of Odanak, she was named Playback Executive of the Year in 2022. The same year, she received the Des Hotels Management Achievement Award from McGill University, which honors prominent business leaders. And I would add that her predecessors, Abraham Tachalik, the founding CEO, and Jean LaRose, who was the CEO over many years, that saw the growth of APTN, have done tremendous work in building and advancing APTN. In terms of jobs, as of August 2023, APTN has 163 staff members. This includes full and part-time and temporary employees. Of these, 60% are Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Many young Indigenous people have started their careers in broadcasting at APTN. Some stayed, and some moved on to other networks. This corporation boasts a gender-balanced workforce, with 52% of the staff identifying as female, 47% identifying as male, and 1% identifying as Two-Spirit. Importantly, 58% of APTN's board of directors are women, including the board chair, Julie Grenier, from Kuujjuaq in Nunavik, northern Quebec. She's a director general of a regional radio and television production company that serves the Inuit of Nunavik in Inuktitut. Since its inception, APTN has either had gender equity or more women on its board, while most other broadcasters would have maybe one or two women on their boards. Clearly, they have been ahead of the curve since they began. APTN became the first ever Indigenous Olympic broadcaster at the 2010 Vancouver Winter Olympics, broadcasting daily coverage in 8 Indigenous languages, as well as in English and French. I recently asked APTN how they would describe their success. Well, the answer was long, but I will highlight just a few points. This is how they see themselves. News and current affairs is one of our top genres, and that's because we cover the stories that others won't. Our dedicated and award-winning news teams cover topics such as policing in Canada, child welfare, access to clean drinking water, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, treaty rights, and more. Our news shows are APTN National News, Nouvelles Nationales APTN. Out of the national broadcasters in Canada, APTN is one of just two which has presence, meaning bureaus, in the north, in Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. APTN audiences enjoy a wide variety of other programming, including shows like The Other Side, Moose Meat and Marmalade, The Secret History of the Wild West. We offer special programming for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation in September, and they note APTN is responding in all the work they do to call to action number 85 from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, which asks APTN to continue to connect Indigenous and non-Indigenous people through its programming and support, and as such to support reconciliation. I will conclude with the following. APTN, in my view, has done very well in its first 25 years. It has confounded not only its critics, but its supporters. It is clearly a channel that provides high-quality, thoughtful, and entertaining programming. In a world that is becoming increasingly polarized and divided, a world where there is increasing pushback on Indigenous and minority rights, APTN provides an island of calm and sanity in a highly fractious and fractured world. APTN is now clearly a veritable Canadian icon that Indigenous people and all Canadians can be proud of. I think Canadians have much to look forward to in the next 25 years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.